Welcome to the first episode of the Draft Crush Show. I'm Edgar Salmingo Jr., joined by the newly trimmed Ricky Rains. How are you doing?
Good, man. Yeah, I was telling Edgar before we came on and hit the record button that I woke up with about damn near shoulder length hair and took my beard trimmer and had an impulse decision to cut it all off. So I am tight shaved under here, man. But I'm doing good. Other than the cold air touching the scalp for the first time in about a year, I'm doing well, man. I'm excited to do this show. Um, how are you doing, Edgar?
I'm good. It's an awesome day. Anytime we get to talk NFL draft, it's an awesome day. So we're excited to share this show with you all. Just to give you a little bit of a primer here, people know you and I as draft nerds, draft nicks, draft analysts, but we've never really put together something of our own in terms of freelancing on different shows. Ricky put out his own big board last year, and so this is really a culmination of years and years of draft nerdiness and trying to
Yeah.
find someone else who um, is a really good analyst in terms of looking at the film, communicating very well, just having a kind heart and just like a real passion for this stuff. So Ricky, I just want to say thank you for doing the show and just appreciate your work, and it's an honor to share the mic with you.
Hey, here I was thinking you were talking about yourself when you said all those really nice superlatives. I was like, man, this guy does love himself, and I'm glad you do because I do too. But the feeling is entirely mutual. I am absolutely a draft nerd, man. I can remember I was making mock drafts of my own when I first started the job that I currently work in finance, and I was making mock drafts, man, sitting in my office when I was like 19 years old, and I'd print them out on computer paper just for myself, like just sitting there
Mm.
looking at them. Anyone that would be willing to listen, I would talk their ear off about the draft. So this is a passion of mine. It is a passion project that we are entering together, and I'm really excited, man. And I hope that everyone enjoys it. Edgar, I think that we'll probably kick this thing off with talking about like what we think about the draft and how we
Mhm.
approach the draft. Does that sound like a good starting point for us?
Yeah, I do want to add also before we start that if you are so kind, if you want to like and subscribe, maybe afterwards we talked about, so you want to comment and show some love. But most of you are watching this. I'm guessing most of you know us as being really big Panthers fans, and so for the
Yeah.
Panthers fans out there, but it's also nice for us to kind of spread our wings, and really analyze the draft and the NFL as a whole. And so this is a really big endeavor for both of us. And so if you want to show us some love, we appreciate it. But again, we're thankful for the people that we've already collaborated with in the Panthers realm. But nice to kind of spread our wings and try something a little bit different.
And hopefully we'll be able to bring some of people's favorite draft analysts and some of their favorite internet personalities onto this show and give us a little bit of insight and perspective into their draft crush
Mhm.
and what they think about the NFL draft and how they got into it as well.
Yeah.
That is one of the points of this show that we're going to be trying to get into is that we want to have numerous different voices. You won't just have to listen to me talk a whole lot. I know we could all listen to Edgar talk for hours at a time, but you won't have to. We are going to get other perspectives, but for today's sake, we are giving a baseline, right? We're starting this process. We're introducing ourselves. We're introducing the premise of the show. And with that, I think that we could introduce some draft philosophies, maybe that we both abide by. Does that sound like a
Can I,
good segue?
yeah. Sorry if I ruined your segue, but can I follow up with that? Like Ricky, maybe before we get to that, I realize we have a title, we have a show. We haven't really talked about what our vision is, and you did talk
Yeah.
about how we plan to bring on different voices and different perspectives. But Ricky, we might have different answers. But like, what's your vision? Why the Draft Crush show? What is it about this particular show that maybe stands out amongst other things that are out there?
Well, for me, and this came down to last year, right? With the draft process, it was my first year really immersing myself into draft Twitter, draft internet, if you will. But also, I was a contributing writer for Cat Crave. I have my podcast, and now I'm a co-host on Panthers on Tap. And so it was a way for me to kind of expand what I was doing. But the coverage on the NFL draft, what I love about it so much is that you don't have to be a true professional to be excited about the NFL draft and to find your niche about like what intrigues you about it, what grabs your attention and how you can evaluate prospects. And everyone that watches college football, they do so and they enjoy the game, but they also realize that that's a stepping stone for those players, right? That there's still another step for those players. And I get very involved, I guess, attached almost, if you will, to
Mhm.
certain players that I find out like their background story, or I see that they've transferred from a small division school to one of the, powerhouse 5 conferences or something like that. And that story about how they got to point A to point Z is one of my favorite parts about the draft, because these are young men that are working very hard to achieve their dreams. And so I think that when I watch all the other draft shows, everyone likes to talk about analytics, and we're going to do that too. Everyone likes to talk about statistics, but like we all have human nature and emotion that we get drawn to something and just kind of like latch on. Last year, if anyone knows me, Jalen Polk is a name that you probably heard me say more than you ever thought you would hear someone say Jalen Polk in the draft process. And I was a big fan of Xavier Worthy. Like we all get those guys that we just kind of like latch onto. And so when you and I spoke last year about, hey, you want to do something maybe specific for the Panthers fans or something for the draft, who knows? This just made a lot of sense. And you are the one that came up with this awesome name. Draft Crush was your thing. Now, how did you come up with that idea?
Yeah, I mean, to me, I mean, it's a great that you're looking back and thinking about how this all started. I think about the NFL draft like you. I love how you mentioned it, kind of being universal. Like everyone can find a piece of the NFL draft that they can love, and so like whether it's my wife or my mom or casual friends or gamblers, like there's something about the NFL draft that just like there's everyone can attach to fantasy people, right? There's like pieces of the draft that can attach. I think maybe at our core, maybe Ricky, maybe you could relate when you were a younger lad watching NFL football. Like I think we just naturally gravitate towards certain players, and so they might not be the best player, they might not be the
Right.
analytics best player, but like growing up, I know I'm aging myself here, but I remember really loving Barry Sanders, and I remember people saying,
Yeah.
"Oh, he had so many tackles behind the offensive line, and he wasn't that great." I loved Dan Marino growing up, just I don't know, just the aura around him. You know, maybe he never won a Super Bowl, right? But then I think every young NFL fan thinks about a player or two and so like, man, I really like this guy. Whether people hate him, whether he messes up, like I'm still ride or die with this particular player. And so Draft Crush really started just going through the draft process for so many years, like you said, Ricky, like going through draft magazines and draft content for so many years. I think naturally people look at big boards, mock drafts. I want to say like deep down, every person who looks at that like is looking for a particular player and to see where they go because I think at our core, we are fans of teams, but we also fall in love with like particular players. And
Absolutely.
um, yeah, and as a background, like I used to work at a high school, and there's so many players who make it into the NFL from that high school that I used to work at. And so I've also, as you said, Ricky, like I've been drawn to the humanity of some of these players, where they come from, who they are, especially those with humble beginnings and where they've gone to. And so I find myself rooting for players and their stories. Maybe in the past I was like, okay, if you're not a Carolina Panther, I hate you because I'm just black and blue. And but now I understand where all the players have no choice in where they're going, so it's no fair
Right.
that I hate on somebody. And so Draft Crush, the essence of Draft Crush is really leaning into all of our draft communities love for particular players that maybe other people don't see as great, but hopefully we would identify and we could uh, pontificate about some of the players that we love more than others. And I like the affectionate term draft crush.
Yeah, look at that pontificate, man. I love that. You threw that one in there at the end. Really drove it
There
home.
you go.
And it's not just a thing that we're going to talk about liking players. We do want to learn. We want to learn about these prospects. We want to give perspectives about the prospects. I watch a lot of the game film behind them. Edgar does a lot of following the breadcrumbs, right? Reading the tea leaves. And we thought that if we kind of combined those two ideals with our love for the NFL draft and for the prospect evaluation process, that this could just be a really cool show.
Yeah.
And if you notice, that's the vibe of the intro. Is we just talked about how when we were young, right? That's how we got into this reading magazines off of a magazine rack. That's
What's a
why the
magazine?
yeah, what's a magazine? Like it's an e-mag? Is that what you mean? No, no, there was literally publications. You had to swipe through the pages. But so you'll notice there's a definite late 90s, early 2000s vibe here to the show. And it's because that's where we kind of got our start here,
Mm.
our love and our passion for it. But hey, enough about us. Well, not really, because let's do a little bit more about us. Edgar, I'm
Yep.
going to bring something up here. These are our draft philosophies. So, in the simplest form, what we did is we just tried to think about what are the things that we, at our core, what do we look at these prospects? Like, what are the goggles that we're wearing when we're looking at them? But also, how do you kind of separate some of the prospects? Because there are a lot of guys that are, play the same position, obviously, but they're different players and they have different skill sets. They have different personalities. They have different intangibles. So we kind of thought that it would be a good idea before we jump into our initial mock draft that we will be
Yep.
doing here in a second. We'll be using the PFF mock simulator. Before we jump into that, we thought it would be a good idea to kind of give you guys an intro into what we think. Edgar, I'm going to let you kick this thing off. These are
Yeah.
Edgar's principles for his draft philosophy.
Yeah. So I mean, just similar to the NFL, Ricky and I have different philosophies. So it's always hard to project in the NFL how teams are going to act because you have 32 GMs who are operating under different information with different needs and different situations. And so I thought it's very important. Like, hey, let's talk about like how do we decide who we like and don't like? If we have a draft crush, maybe we should talk about why someone's more of a draft crush than another. So, first one you see here, strength and the strength. So I mean, this is just a year long back in the magazine days, like just philosophy that I've always thought about is you could draft to fill a need. Like, oh, I'll just give an example for a team that we are near and dear to the Panthers. People could say like, oh, the defense is struggling. We got to draft defense number 8. But another philosophy could be like, hey, you're really good at running. Why don't we just make that run offense, that rush offense even better? And so like I believe you don't always have to fill a need because I'd rather be elite somewhere than average everywhere. Emphasis on upside. So in real life, in fantasy, in different places, some people have a floor and a ceiling, yeah. And so some players, maybe they're older, maybe they filled out their body right away, and some people may not have the production at the college level, but they have the freakiest intangibles and measurements and athleticism, right? And so I would rather gamble and potentially strike out on somebody who's really, really athletic and has the traits than someone who's kind of maxed out and you kind of like they're kind of old reliable for lack of a better word. So
So you
I like
you almost would you almost say that you lean more towards like the ceiling players as opposed to the floor players?
Yeah, all things considered equal, right? So like if there's two
Right.
players that are evenly graded, like I will give a not like I'm not gonna say like this person who has 0 tackles and 0 sacks but is six
Right.
seven
Right.
with oozing athleticism versus someone who's been productive. Obviously there's a balance here, but I just lean towards upside because I think of it like my favorite metaphor, Ricky, is like a major league baseball slugger, right? Like to hit a home run, you have to swing big. And if you have to swing big, you have to strike out. And so some of the biggest home run hitters strike out. And so I don't like the play it safe because playing it safe is good and it'll make you, decent. You'll make it in the league, but I want to win. And so like I want to swing big and swing like really hard. I'm not going to say gamble like crazy, but that's what I lean towards.
So kind of like a Giancarlo Stanton, if you will, type of philosophy here from Edgar Salmingo. Now
Yeah,
you're a Dodgers
yeah.
fan, so you probably hated me saying that. Sorry about that.
He is from LA, so I'll forgive it.
Fair enough.
Um,
Okay.
awareness of biases. So I think one thing that we all need to know is that we all have biases, whatever it is, whether it's location, position, our preferences for offense and defense. And so like I'm just aware that I'm not perfect. I'm aware I make mistakes, and so just know that I'm trying to, like you said at the beginning, Ricky, I'm trying to learn as well. And so just being aware of what your biases are, I think is very important. Um, Fourth bullet point, it says after elite talent accumulate picks. So like I think the draft, even though I love to analyze it and nerd out on it with you, Ricky, I think it's a crapshoot. I think you take 250 plus picks, and I mean, just talking about it, like one of the best quarterbacks, debatable, one of the best quarterbacks in the league is Brock Purdy, and he was the last pick in the draft, right? So like, not only did every team miss on him, every team missed on him multiple times, yeah. And so I think after you get the elite talent, after you swing for the fences and get like the best blue chip person, like I like getting more lottery tickets, for lack of a better word. Like just keep trying. Like there's a lot of players that I'm sure Ricky is the same boat. We've liked in the past in draft season, and then like they
Right.
just didn't pan out, right? Or
Yep.
the aforementioned Jalen Polk, right? But his
He
his
still
story
has
isn't
time.
his story isn't finished yet. Sorry, got to think of somebody else. But I would just like to say that like why not try more swings at it? Why don't you have more lottery tickets at it? Because for a lot of these, I mean, it's fair and it's sad to say, but a lot of people are not gonna make it from the draft. So you might as well take more lottery tickets. Fifth one, trump card. I like if a player has an elite trait and an elite skill versus, and this is the same thing as upside, instead of like being average at everything. So if this one edge player has a really good spin move and that's what they're really, really good at, that's all they can do, that helps me better than someone who's like average at everything in their pass rush toolkit. So I like trump cards. Athletic minimum thresholds. It is a league. It is a sport with the best of the best athletes, and so there are thresholds where if you don't meet them, it's very, very, very rare for you to be successful. So long arms, weight, things of that nature, like they factor into my mind because obviously people who are smaller, AKA or Bryce Young is way below the thresholds. Like you could still be successful, but the odds of making it are obviously more difficult. And I'm an analytics guy, so adding to your expertise, Ricky, to this project, I also love analyzing analytics data. It's not for me everything. So people say like analytics versus film, who's better? Like I'm a big believer. I'm like, why don't you just take in all the information possible, even
Yeah.
intangibles, interviews, medicals, whatever, and then make a decision. Like why would I make a decision without all the evidence? Why would I take just film and not look at analytics? Why would I look at analytics and not even look at film? And so for me, how I like using analytics is when we look at day 3 players, I like seeing like who are people that jump out. For me last year, Jalen Coker was someone who like exceeded all the analytics, both athletic profile and stats. And obviously he had an incredible season this year. And so I love using analytics in that form.
Like that, maybe a little toot your own horn right there at the end too. Jalen Coker was the one. Yeah, that's good stuff, man. That's really
I'm
good.
just saying.
No,
I'm
I
just saying.
love it, man. And I think that's a really important thing too. I love all of your principles, and I agree with them as well. But the making sure you're putting all of the ingredients in the pot, right? Like you can't make a really good chili if you're just using beans and tomatoes. Like you're gonna have to have the spices, right? You're gonna have to have some herbs. You're gonna have to have some meat. Like there's everything has to meet together in the pot to get the full recipe put together. So I think that's an important thing to point out.
Is this an Office reference?
A little bit, yeah. I mean, everything I do is kind of an Office reference, to be honest. So yeah, yes. I don't drop my giant pot of chili when I'm carrying it around, though. At least, so don't worry. I am a fat white accountant, but I'm not named Kevin. So, all right. So I'll jump in here with mine,
Yeah.
and then we'll get this show underway with the real attraction. My first one is focus on where a player wins and how that fits. Edgar, you and I actually have had this conversation a little bit off camera as well, where I like to focus on the more positive aspects of the prospect evaluation as opposed to telling you what somebody can't do. That's kind of twofold for me. A, sometimes schools or the teams that they're playing for aren't asking them to do certain things, and that doesn't mean that they can't do them. So I think that it's almost dismissive and a little bit short-sighted to only look at what somebody doesn't do well or hasn't shown that they can do well. Now, that's a little bit different than when you see somebody who has obvious limitations or struggles doing something that they're asked to do. That's fair and an evaluation process is going to be positives and negatives. But I like to look at what does this player do well and how does that fit into prospective teams. That is just a baseline thought that I have. Complementary players and skill sets kind of ties into that a little bit too. Once you can kind of figure out where certain players win, you also know what areas you might be weak at, if for lack of a better term, right? Maybe it's not weakness, but maybe it's susceptibility. You have to kind of shore up all of those avenues, but it doesn't always have to be with one player. You can get, like you said, you don't need the jack of all trades if you have a master of one. You can bring in another guy who is a master at that other thing and have them complement each other. It's team building. It's a little bit of foresight and it's thinking ahead instead of just going for, zeroing in and having tunnel vision on one thing. Intangibles matter a lot to me. I love when you get to hear about like scouts where they sit and they talk to these prospects or like GMs or head coaches that are at these like Shrine Bowl games or the Senior Bowls, and they sit down and they have meetings with these guys and they're like, man, comes from such a great family. He's struggled with some certain things in life, or he's had adversity that he's had to overcome. But when he's out on that field, he's a bona fide leader, right? He fights through knick-knack injuries, which are a part of the sport, and it's going to happen at all times. You're going to have days where you don't feel good, days where you're hurting. It's that the tenacity to go through, and tenacity is on my next one too. But intangibles matter, and you cannot quantify those. There is no analytics. There is no film for those kinds of things. So the stories and the interpersonal relationships, football is still a sport that is played by human beings, and there is a human element, and there is the camaraderie part. You talk about building a locker room. So intangibles matter a lot to me when I'm evaluating a prospect. Toughness and tenacity, especially for skill positions. I'm going to say this, and I don't mean it in a negative way, but when you look at the Miami Dolphins and the struggles that they have had at times, when the weather gets cold, when they face a physical bully, right, they seem to kind of shrivel up a little bit. And what I look for is I love speed, man. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that everyone needs to be able to run through a brick wall, and I don't care how slow you are. I got to have that complementary skill set. But I don't care how fast you are if you're afraid of getting hit. Part of football, and Xavier Worthy's a great example of that. I'll use him just as a quick example. I was very high on Xavier Worthy, and everyone told me his frame was too, he was too thin. He was too small. He wasn't going to be able to take the punishment, and he was just going to be a gadget receiver. He's going to be used in gadget plays. He's fast. The guy is the fastest wide receiver we've ever seen at the NFL Combine, right? Of course you want to use him on those plays. But he also works that intermediate, man. He's a good route runner. He's not afraid to mix it up and go up for contested catches. That's what I look for. Show me that you have that in you, and show me that you're willing to grit through some of the tough times. Nobody likes a one-note dish. See, this is why you and I are simpatico, Edgar, because you did that thing, and I was sitting here and I already had it on the principles talking about the big chili bowl. Show me that you don't have to be the best at everything, right? But you also can't be only good at one thing. So I don't need you to be the best at everything, but I do need you to be really good at least one thing, right? But I don't need everything to be the exact same. I like to build like a puzzle. So I find the corner pieces. You build from the outside in, right? So when I'm talking about building a team, you get your cornerstone players, right? And it's a whole lot easier if you're doing a big jigsaw puzzle and you have everything from the outside starting to form in. It's a whole lot easier to say, here's what I'm looking for, a specific thing that you're looking for, if that's all that's missing, right? But you can't start building a puzzle with all of the big green pieces in a yard, right? You're doing a backyard shed and it's just laying in the grass. You can't build the grass unless you have everything around it, right? You have to have a clear vision of what else you need to be able to do that. So I think you find those corner pieces of a team and then you build around that. Drafting for need in the early rounds of the draft is for closers. It's not exactly coffee. Coffee is for closers. But what I mean by that is when you're the Kansas City Chiefs, right? The perennial, I am always going to be in the Super Bowl, or I'm at least always going to be in the AFC Championship game as long as Pat Mahomes and Andy Reid are hanging out with each other and they're on the same team. We're going to be there. They don't have to necessarily do that best player available strategy. They can do exactly what I just said, where you could kind of look for that specific missing piece and you can fill that in. I don't believe that teams who are at the beginning of the draft, right, our Carolina Panthers, the Tennessee Titans, the Cleveland Browns, the New York Jets, I don't think that those teams are in a position to say we have to draft a quarterback, right? Because that's what we have to have. Now, look, if you're a quarterback needy team and there's quarterbacks that you like, then go for it. But I don't think you force that square peg into a round hole if you're down there at that beginning of the draft, because you obviously have a lot of holes if you've lost that many games to earn that draft pick. So that's just the basics of this. But as Edgar said at the beginning of this, or when he was talking about his principles, it's a crapshoot. That is the nature of the beast with the NFL draft. So as a reminder, I thought that it might be a nice thing to point out, as Brian Fantana from Anchorman once said, and possibly every GM in the NFL, 60% of the time it works every time. There is no science. Edgar, as much as we want to say that we could do analytics and we could do film evaluation, there is no science, man.
It's an art.
It's an art, and it's a roll of the dice. A pretty dice, but it's still dice, right?
Yeah.
All right, so did anything stand out to you about what my principles were against yours? I actually think that we had a lot that worked well together. Even though there
Yeah.
were some differences, I think that they work well with each other.
Yeah.
And I think that you'll be able to see the differences when we do some of these mocks.
Yeah, I do think the things that you brought up is like, oh, I could have put them as things that I think of too. So I don't have any strong disagreements. This is not one of those hot take shows, Ricky, where we battle against each other and say like you're absolutely wrong. But I do agree with a lot
You
of
don't
things
want
you
to
said.
argue on here like what was it, Skip and Stephen A back in the day? You don't want to do that?
We have plenty of time for that. But as of right now, I
Fair
think
enough.
we're good.
Fair enough. All right, so should we just go ahead and get into this PFF mock draft then today?
Yeah, absolutely. So, as you pulled up, Ricky, can I talk
Yep.
while you pull it up?
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm going to share the screen so if it goes away, don't freak out. It's we can still
Yeah,
hear each other.
yeah. So one of my pet peeves, I forgot if I told you this, Ricky. One of my pet peeves is when people put out mock drafts and they don't say, is this what you're predicting to happen? Or is this what you're like anticipating will happen? And so I always say, if you're gonna put out a mock draft, all you have to do, just tell me, are you being predictive or are you being prescriptive? Are you saying this is what's gonna happen? Or are you saying if you were the GM, this is what's gonna happen? And so
Yeah.
we are another preface here. Ricky and I are very aware we are well before the Senior Bowl. We are well before free agency. We are well before pro days, 30 visits. There's the teams haven't even set their boards yet, and so I know people have a hissy fit about like mock drafts, saying this is absolutely wrong or whatever. Dude, like this is just fun. Like we're just enjoying what we think will happen, and I don't think everyone should get all riled up and say like, "Hey, I can't believe you passed on X player." Like, hey, we're just playing scenarios and seeing. And so maybe Ricky, if we do this so often, maybe we try something different. Maybe we do something a little bit crazy because hey, like every draft is crazy and we're super early and we're doing a fun exercise.
Yeah, this is a mock draft being done at the end of January, right? Like, this is going to be for most likelihood of this is going to be laughable here in about a month and a half to 2 months, right?
Yeah.
But what I think is important is it gives you a baseline. It gives you an idea of where we each stand, where we think teams stand before free agency, before these all-star games, before they have a chance to meet with all these prospects one-on-one with their official 30 visits and things of that nature. This is just kind of showing, hey, look, this is a weakness of this team. This is an area of need. Or if a great prospect like this drops, I can't see this general manager or this head coach passing up on a guy like that. And so Edgar and I are going to do our best of kind of now, Edgar, we're doing this from a team's perspective, right? Not necessarily us. Is that correct?
Correct. So like
Okay.
we're trying to, what do you call it? Or actually, let me take that back. I think we should be doing it if. Huh, what do you want to do, Ricky?
Oh yeah. See, look, I just messed this up already. So how about on this one? Maybe we do it what we would do
Yeah,
instead of what the teams would do because we don't have a whole lot of information on who
correct.
teams have met with or anything like that, right?
Yeah, like it's
It's
hard for us
not
to
as
predict what they're gonna do.
yeah, exactly. It's not as much of reading the tea leaves, right? This is
Right.
more so us saying if the draft board falls this way, here's what I would do. Here's what I like here for this
Yeah.
team.
I
Um,
will say if two prospects are kind of close, I'm gonna lean towards what I think they would do, but my tendency will be
yeah,
like what I would do.
heck yeah, let's do that then. Okay, so let's get this thing started. Edgar, you're gonna do the odd picks. I'm gonna do the
Okay.
even picks. Correct?
Okay. Okay.
Okay, cool. Let me
And
start
for
the draft.
fun and for simplicity, should we do no trades?
Absolutely, yeah. Because if we do trades, man, I could trade back all day in this thing. Um, so yeah, let's do no trades. Let's just take it for what it is. A first initial baseline, full first round mock draft.
All right.
And you're
Tennessee
on the clock.
Titans. Yeah, Tennessee Titans. Brand new GM, kind of uncertain at quarterback. A lot of different holes. I like BPA. Their front office, I forgot who mentioned it, but they said that hey, we're not going to pass on a generational player at the
Yeah.
number one pick. I don't know if a generational player is out there, but if there was to be one, the one who's the consensus number one, the Heisman Trophy winner, I would guess and I would say Travis Hunter would be the pick at number one.
Okay, so you're gonna go Travis Hunter. I want to
Yeah.
touch on the generational thing real quick too, since we got to bring that up. You can't
Speak,
have generational
speak on it, Ricky.
prospects. You can't have generational prospects every single draft, or they're not generational. Like people have got to understand that words have meanings and the meanings are there for a reason, right? Generational is in a generation. Like that is incredibly rare to find, right? Like you talk about like maybe a Andrew Luck type of prospect. Even Trevor Lawrence was not a generational prospect. Like he had great measurables and he had great success, but there was a lot of question marks, right? And he didn't grade out the way that a generational prospect will grade out. That's individual stuff, but like this generational thing has gotten ridiculous, man. I'll tell you what I thought too. When Tennessee came out and said that, their GM, I believe it was, or their ownership came out and said that, I think they were trying to draw up interest and put it out there in the universe that there was some sort of generational prospect to get any kind of interested parties into kind of almost like a, man, we got to go get that. We don't want to miss out on that either. I think that's a drawing up interest. I think it's a smoke screen. I love Travis Hunter. I don't think he's a bad prospect. Generational, I wouldn't pick anyone in this draft personally as generational.
Agreed. Number 2, Cleveland Browns. General Manager Ricky. Who you got?
All right. So for the Cleveland Browns, you got Myles Garrett, who says he wants to win. He says he wants to be in Cleveland, but he wants to win, right? And that if they're not going to win, then they, need to have a conversation. They've got the Deshaun Watson fiasco at their fingertips. There's no real solution to that. If it's me, man, I'm cutting my losses and I'm getting the hell away from that situation. I wouldn't have got myself in that situation to begin with. But I don't think you pass on a guy like Abdul Carter for anyone else in this draft. Now, Mason Graham, I'm going to probably, well, I won't get into that. That's a spoiler, but I'm very high on Mason Graham. I have a very high grade on him. Tet McMillan, I think, could also potentially make some sense there, but they have Jerry Jeudy, who had a really nice year. They have their rookie Cedric Tillman out of Tennessee, who I think is a very good ball player. Elijah Moore, I think, is a free agent potentially, but I think that he's a solid player, and I wouldn't be surprised to see them try to bring him back. So Abdul Carter, if you paired him with Myles Garrett on both sides, who better to learn from than Myles Garrett, right? But also that would just cause havoc for the rest of the teams in their division and in the AFC. And if there's one thing you need in the AFC, you got to get these quarterbacks uncomfortable because there is a boatload of talent at quarterback in the AFC.
Yeah, good pick. I don't know. Questions are up in the air if Myles Garrett even comes back or wants to leave.
Yep.
And then I think the hot rumor out there is Kirk Cousins to fill in that quarterback position because you don't have to pay him a lot. And you mentioned Deshaun Watson, so I could definitely see them not going quarterback, even though I know that's a possibility out there.
Yep.
Number 3, New York Giants. So their situation, many fans.
And you tell me if you want to see like any of the positions or anything, and I'll
yeah. A lot of fans that I know wanted the GM and the head coach gone, or one of them, and they're both staying. And so I think they're really under the gun. So this is not a very good pick. The person I'm going to pick, I think maybe is not the best for them to pick because of they're under the gun and they need to win now. But I don't think you could pass on a quarterback, and I also don't think there's a quarterback out there in free agency or in the trade market that would make them happy.
Mm-hmm.
I myself prefer Cam Ward over Shedeur Sanders, so I'm going to go with Cam Ward as the quarterback. Pair him with Tyrone Tracy in the backfield, Malik Neighbors as a wide receiver, and maybe they turn it around and they save their jobs for this upcoming season.
Yeah, I like that. I think if I were right now to pick between Cam Ward and Shedeur Sanders for the Giants, not personal preference, right? But if we were doing this the other way about like the team, there seems to be a real affinity between the two of Shedeur Sanders and Brian Dable. I've seen them together often. I've seen Malik Neighbors spending time with Shedeur Sanders. I know that they got together when Shedeur was in New York and they played a little game of toss out in the streets. So I think that Shedeur could also make sense there. But Cam Ward, I really do like his talent. I think you're correct, though, about they're going to find themselves in a predicament one way or another that they're going to be banking on a rookie quarterback and not necessarily a stellar prospect, because I think that if you were to look at the last handful of years, this would be one of the considered weaker quarterback classes that we've seen. So they're hitching their wagon to a rookie, but they're probably also hoping that buys them maybe an extra year too, that if they show progress within that year, do they have that building block, that foundational piece, sort of like the Panthers with Bryce Young. All right, so pick number 4 with the New England Patriots. This is where the draft gets a little bit interesting to me because I think that the Patriots need an offensive tackle badly. I think that they need protection. They've got Drake May. That is their, wonder kid, right? That is the future of the franchise is Drake May. They feel good about that. Their offensive line was miserable. And if you are allowing your future to get hit and sacked on a consistent basis, you're not going to get the most out of that player. But the problem that I have, I don't particularly like any of the offensive linemen at pick 4. I love Will Campbell, and I think that Will Campbell is a really good football player. I don't know that he comes in and immediately gives you a franchise cornerstone left tackle. I think he can. There's questions about his arm length. I don't know, man. When these guys are really good at something in college, right? Like Will Campbell was a stud tackle in college. I don't think that I look at him and say, I better start him at guard. I shouldn't even give him a chance at tackle, right? I'm going to let him do what he did and earn that unless he proves me otherwise. But for me in this pick, I'm going to do something different. I would go Tet McMillan here.
How dare you?
I know. I'm sorry. I get it. But
they just drafted Jalen Polk last year, Ricky.
They did. And you know what, man? This is going to help Jalen Polk a lot, if you want my honest opinion. You give Drake May, Tet McMillan, and there's your bona fide X receiver, right? 6'5", 220 pounds. Incredible catch radius. A pretty smooth route runner for a guy his size. That's improved as well over the course of the last 2 seasons. Good with the ball in his hands. He's a dynamic player. He's not a burner. If he runs under 4.5, I think he's going to be locked in as a top 10 pick. Now, if he runs in the low 4.4s, I think he's a top 5 pick because he does have the ball skills and the size that just scream wide receiver 1, right? And when you got a guy that's that size and that build and with those ball skills, that doesn't come along often. So you look at a guy like a Drake London, you look at a guy like Mike Evans. Those are the 2 names that you're going to hear a lot. I think he's closer to Drake London than he was to Mike Evans. Evans has a power aspect to him that I don't see with Tet. But Drake London is not a bad prospect either. So I think that just makes a lot of sense for them. Give him the wide receiver 1. See what you have with Pop Douglas. See what you have with Jalen Polk, maybe even Javon Baker, and open up that offense a little bit.
All right. Sounds good. Jacksonville Jaguars. So they had a fun story last week, Ricky. They stole the offensive coordinator Liam Cohen from the Tampa Bay Buccaneers after he jilted them and didn't respond to their calls. But I'm torn here. I like Mason Graham a lot. I think there's a need there, but they hired an offensive guy, and so this is just my philosophy. If you're gonna lean into investing, you're getting rid of you fired your GM because of Liam Cohen. You're going to give him Ben Johnson type money. You have to have a secret rendezvous that no one else is allowed to know. You might as well go all offense and say the offense has to be really, really good. You got Trevor Lawrence, you got Brian Thomas, you got skill players at the running back position. So I'm going to go with, I know we just talked about him, but I'm going to go with Will Campbell, the tackle or guard from LSU. Maybe he plays tackle, maybe he plays guard, but it's a good problem to have with the Jaguars because hey, you could figure out how to work him into your line and make sure that offense stays humming.
And see, what's interesting, I like that pick too. Also because Will Campbell, he does give you that kind of almost built-in backup plan, right? That if he doesn't pan out at tackle, there is this consensus feeling that he's more than able to be a high-level guard. And guards, look, the tackles are the important position because they're playing that perimeter. They're and the left tackle is protecting the blind side for the most part of right-handed quarterbacks. They're protecting that blind side against these edge rushers that will line up out wide, in 9 technique, and they're really just raging down on that quarterback. But guards, man, the interior pressure that we see in the NFL nowadays as well. That's an important position. So I like the guy that has that versatility there. I brought up the offensive tackles here just because there's a lot of people that are also very high on Kelvin Banks Jr. and have him as their top overall tackle. It's possible that a team like Jacksonville or one of these teams that is looking for an offensive tackle could be more intrigued by the high-end upside of a guy like Kelvin Banks as opposed to the more solid floor maybe of a guy like Will Campbell. So I am surprised, Mr. Air on upside, Edgar Salmingo Jr., that you went with the floor guy. All right, pick 6.
I gave my rationale.
You did, and it's good rationale. I do like it. pick six for the Oakland, or I just called them the Oakland Raiders. If you're wondering how old I am, the Las Vegas Raiders. The Las Vegas Raiders. Now, look, this is a team that needs a lot of help, man, in just about every position. They could stand to have a quarterback. Man, do I go quarterback there? Yeah, I think I would. Now, the question that I have here is, you got Tom Brady in the building now with Las Vegas, right? Does he like the idea of taking a more conventional pocket passer, which is, I think, is Shedeur Sanders. Shedeur has escapability. He can move a little bit, but this is not a dual threat quarterback necessarily in Shedeur Sanders, in my opinion. But I think that Shedeur is a really smart quarterback. I think that he can read defenses. I think that he has good progressions that he goes through. I think that he has really nice accuracy on his passes, especially the deep ball. I think he throws a really nice deep ball. So I'm going to go Shedeur Sanders here. I also think that Shedeur in Las Vegas is just kind of showtimey, which works for Shedeur. And I think that he could be a star there if everything goes the way that they want it to and they build around him in the right, correct ways. I think that Shedeur Sanders could be a really good quarterback there. And now they have Pete Carroll as a head coach too. And Pete Carroll is a very good developer of quarterbacks, in my opinion, as well. So I think that's a really nice fit there with Shedeur.
Yeah, the rumors are maybe Russell Wilson follows Pete Carroll, so Shedeur could have a really good mentor, and it'd be a good landing spot for him to land there. And then have Tom Brady in the building. Like, you might as well set him up for success with Pete Carroll.
And then you can let him sit for the year, right? You can let him sit for the year, because we've seen what happens sometimes with these rookie quarterbacks, that you thrust them into it and they have to go and play right away in year one. If he can sit behind Russell Wilson and get that familiarity with the playbook, with what Pete is looking for out of the offense, and they've got their offensive coordinator they'll have to figure out. Pete doesn't run the offense, right? Pete's a defensive-minded guy. But I think that his ability to build the culture and facilitate that team building, I think Shedeur is a leader, and I like that a lot.
Pick 7 with the Jets. The Jets have a new head coach in Aaron Glenn, a new defensive coordinator, who we're familiar with, Ricky, Steve Wilkes.
Yeah.
But a lot of things going on, a new GM that they just hired. I will go BPA. It's also a position of need, but I also feel like, he's fallen this far. You got a defensive head coach. You want to set the tone and get BPA all at the same time. I'll go with Mason Graham, the interior defensive lineman for Michigan.
That one stings for the Panthers fans. I'm going to tell you that much, because Mason Graham would be absolutely perfect on South Mint Street. I think that he would solve a lot of problems in the interior, but also as a pass rusher. I think Mason Graham is an absolutely phenomenal prospect, and I think that would be a good signing for the Jets as well. A nice little acquisition. So now we get to the Carolina Panthers at pick 8. Carolina Panthers had one of the worst defenses that the NFL has seen in modern times. I think it was the worst scoring defense, if I'm not mistaken. The rushing defense allowed, I think the number ended around 795 yards per game is what they were allowing on the ground. Or at least that's what it felt like on Sundays. Yes. Just brutal. But they also retained Evero as their defensive coordinator. And Evero likes to do different things with his coverages, right? He played a lot of cover 3 last year, but he kind of almost seemed strapped because of the personnel about what could he do there. I think this is an interesting spot for them with how the board has fallen. I'm a big fan of Malachi Starks. I wouldn't bat my eye at taking him with 8, but Will Johnson falling there, I think, is also very appealing. We also know that the pass rush for the Panthers is essentially non-existent. Like, I just don't think that there is much there. Mike Green is a guy that a lot of fans absolutely love. And his official weight, I saw the number today for the Senior Bowl, was 251 pounds, which is much better than the reported weight of 236. This is a guy that had 17 sacks last year. I think he's an ultra-productive guy. But James Pierce Jr. is going to be the guy that I end up going with here. James Pierce Jr. is the edge out of Tennessee. This is a high recruit. You're talking about a 5-star, a local guy from Charlotte, and I know that doesn't matter. But the Panthers also do seem to have their preferences with local guys. They seem to like that connection. But James Pierce isn't all just sentimental. This guy is a very long, rangy, fast, explosive edge defender. I think that he's better against the run than he gets credit for. I think he has a really good awareness and good recognition for plays. I think that he has the longer frame than a guy like a Mike Green to continue to add mass to that frame that I think will happen in the NFL. But you said it too. If you got a guy who has a terrific spin move, give me that as opposed to a guy that doesn't have something. I thought that you were subbing James Pierce when you said that because his spin move is lethal. It is going to remind everyone of Brian Burns. But if you end up with Brian Burns, is that really the worst thing in the world?
Mm. Good pick, Ricky. I'm sure everyone will 100% believe in you and will not argue it
100%. They're
Monday.
going to love me for that.
The Saints are good buddies, our rivals in New Orleans. I'm gonna go a little bit off the board here,
Okay.
Ricky, and I'm going to and I forgot who it was, but I've seen this in some mock drafts. And we talked about upside, we talked about physical traits, we talked about
Mm-hmm.
tools, you talked about Mike Green. By the way, this is the only team that we're mocking that does not have a head coach yet. So this is going to
That's
be
right.
very
Yeah.
hard to predict what they're going to do because they don't have a head coach at all.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to go Michael Williams out of Georgia, the edge defender. And
All
so
right.
this is a team that's taken toolsy, a GM that's taken toolsy edge defenders before.
Mm-hmm.
They went and got Chase Young last year. He's going to be a free agent this year. And so I could picture them. I know Mike Green could also be a possibility. I know other positions could be a possibility. But I'm going to take a reach, not a reach, but relative to the consensus board, I'm going to take a reach and bank on the tools that the Saints will probably value more than, say, that they'll value in Michael Williams that, say, other
Yeah.
players can offer.
I'll tell you, man, he was in the range for me with the Panthers there at 8. He was the other guy that I was really thinking of because of his run defense, because of, again, that size. Those players don't come, like, they don't grow on trees, right? Like, these guys with the long arms, 6'5", 260 pounds, like, that guy right there has the potential to be a game changer at the edge position, edge defending position. So I think that's a smart pick. I like that. Pick 10 for the Chicago Bears. Now, they have got Ben Johnson at the helm. Ben Johnson comes from Detroit, where he revolutionized the Jared Goff and that offense over there. How did he do that? He built in the trenches, right? That offensive line is the key to that success. And so I think when you look at the Bears, I think they got to do something there. I think you're going to have to bring in somebody that can bolster that offensive line a little bit. I've got two picks that I'm really stuck between here. Armand Membo out of Missouri is a riser right now. And I think that he has a chance to have a massive rise after the Senior Bowl. It says here he's 6'3", 314 pounds. His measurement today was 336 pounds. This guy is a beast. He is an athletic tackle. He played right tackle at Missouri. I think that he has a little bit of versatility, but he's probably a right tackle as well in the NFL. I'm actually going to go with him and say that there is a little bit that reminds Ben Johnson of Penei Sewell here, and understands that having that right tackle isn't a bad thing. I'm going to give the Chicago Bears Armand Membo at pick 10. I know.
It's funny you did that because if you didn't pick him, I was going to pick him for the 49ers here.
Look at that. Look at us.
Look at that. Look at you. Look at you. Stealing players and
who would have thought? Not us.
not us. I'm gonna pivot. Same thought, same process. Can't say I've seen a lot, but I know that he has his fans, especially after a long playoff run. But I'm gonna still stay offensive line, still stay with tackle, guard. Still want to solidify offensive line. I'm gonna go with Josh Simmons, the offensive lineman out of Ohio State, the Ohio State.
It's going to be interesting to see what the feeling is on Josh Simmons too, because I'm a big fan of Josh Connerly, the tackle out of Oregon. I think that he's a really good prospect as well. And Simmons is coming off the injury, but had he not been injured, Simmons might be the guy that shoots up as offensive tackle 1, honestly, on the way that he was playing this year. Dallas Cowboys at 12, and I'm going to try to speed this up a little bit. Dallas Cowboys at 12. Ashton Jennings, it just makes too much sense, man. They love running backs. They need a running back. I think that helps Dak. I think it frees things up for CD. I just think that Ashton Jennings is a ball player, and I think that makes a lot of sense for the Cowboys.
All right. Pick number 13 for the Dolphins. They have a pending free agent that is desired by a lot of teams, Javon Holland. I think they could
Mm-hmm.
work on the back end. I know, Ricky, you're a big fan. I know Will Johnson's
Mm-hmm.
falling, but I'm going to go with Malachi Starks, safety out of Georgia.
I like it.
Rangy, versatile, playmaker, tone setter. I'm going with
Yep.
the safety, Malachi Starks.
He could play man in the slot if he needs to. Probably best over top. A lot of range, great ball skills, physical player. I love him, man. I think he's one of those ones at safety. The
Mm.
Indianapolis Colts at 14. This is tough for me. I think that Tyler Warren is the easiest thing to predict there because Tyler Warren is going to remind a lot of people of Dallas Clark, especially people in Indianapolis. And he is a
Because he wears number
high
44.
because he wears number 44. That's the only reason. Why? No, he's a physical guy, great with the ball after the catch, really good hands at the catch, but he's also a physical blocker in line. You could play him in line. You can line him up out slot. I mean, his versatility, his game is going to remind people of Dallas Clark. But you also see there where it says team needs, they need an edge and a defensive back. This is one of those situations where Juju Brents was a guy that I really liked a lot coming out of Kansas State. He's had difficulty staying healthy there in Indianapolis. They have to play CJ Stroud. They've still got Trevor Lawrence over there in Jacksonville. I think that they're going to try to bolster that. And I think if Will Johnson falls here, I think that you see them go BPA and they take Will Johnson.
Mm. Pick number 15, the Falcons. Just kind of a refresher. The Falcons fired their defensive coordinator, who was reapered by Bryce Young. Just throwing it out there. One of their biggest weaknesses, just someone who's seen them twice. They really, really, really can't affect the quarter. Like Bryce Young had time all day. He was running around, but they just need a presence on the defensive line, a pass rush. Looking at who's out there, we already talked about him, but in terms of the tools, in terms of the potential pass rush ability that he has, I'll go with Mike Green, the 250 plus pound, newly 250 plus pound edge defender from Marshall.
And that edge position, man, is really interesting because I also think a name that we haven't spoke about, but I think is also potentially in play there at 8 with the Carolina Panthers all the way down to 15, where I think he also makes sense, is Jalen Walker out of Georgia. I think that he's a player also that has that linebacker edge hybrid ability to him, versatility. But does he do either one of those at a high enough level to warrant this kind of pick? I don't know. That's where teams are going to have to figure that out. But I know that there is a lot of smoke with Jalen Walker with the Panthers at 8, and I think that anywhere down after 8 is going to be a potential landing spot for him as well. Arizona Cardinals here. Look, they had Darius Robinson they took out of Missouri last year. He got injured, so he didn't play a whole lot. I think also another thing that you can do here, though, is I think you could give Kyler Murray more weapons. He's got Marvin Harrison Jr. They've got Trey McBride. But to steal a principle from Edgar, strengthen the strength, right? They've got James Conner, but do they have a deep threat field stretcher? Do they have an after-the-catch guy? I think that's where Luther Burden III could make a ton of sense. And I think that you can use him out of the backfield. I think you can use him in the slot. I think that he is a dynamic after the catch. If you have Kyler Murray scrambling around, I think Luther does a really good job of working back to the quarterback. That is where I'm going to take there is Luther Burden III with pick 16.
All right. Pick 17, the Cincinnati Bengals. I think everybody knows their offense is great and it's good. No need to make any wholesale changes. I think people will obviously want to improve the line. They did hire a new they fired their defensive coordinator, Lou Anarumo, who was highly touted, and all of a sudden he had head coach prospects, and now he was fired. I think they want to overhaul the defense because it was sagging. I know we can make a strength a strength. That was my philosophy, but I'm gonna go with the strength is already strong enough, and so I'm gonna go with someone on the defensive line. I really like this guy, Kenneth Grant out of Michigan. Big, powerful. Obviously, he's a little bit overshadowed by Mason Graham, but I think he can make a name for himself on his own, and he'd be a great pick for the Cincinnati Bengals.
Terrific player. And if they keep Trey Hendrickson there in Cincinnati, adding Kenneth Grant is going to only open things up for him, which that guy doesn't need any more help. All right, Seattle. This is an interesting one for me, but I'll keep it kind of quick here. You got Mike McDonald there. Mike McDonald is the head coach. He was the defensive coordinator for the Ravens. He was the defensive coordinator for the Michigan Wolverines. This dude is a menace. He's a lunatic on the defensive side. I think that you could see them being really interested with a player that I was just talking about, they have a need at linebacker and at edge. I think they go and they draft Jalen Walker at pick 18, and he becomes kind of that chess piece for Mike McDonald and that Seahawks defense, where he is just going to move him around. And I think that's a wonderful landing spot for Jalen Walker as well.
That's a great pick. The Tampa Bay Bucks at 19. Ooh, so many options here. PFF needs an edge, linebacker, defensive back. Jalen Walker would have been a great fit. So thanks a lot, Ricky.
Yep, you're welcome. I'm here to make your job hard.
I'm gonna go with an edge, and I'm gonna go with one that has the tools. I think maybe he's someone you might like, Ricky, but I'm not entirely sure.
Okay.
But I remember seeing a tweet of yours, and he has the freaky traits, the freaky ability. Tampa Bay has an on-fire offense. They just lost their offensive coordinator, so let's see how their offense is. But Baker Mayfield has them humming. Let's shore up the defense. I like Shamar Stewart, the edge defender out of Texas A&M.
Yeah. That's a 6'6", 290-pound guy that moves like he's, I don't know, 6'4", 260. I mean, this guy's got some serious explosiveness, long arms, physical. The production isn't there, but the pressures were, right? And sometimes when you can see that at least that pressure rate is there, you know that he's effective at getting after the quarterback. Denver Broncos, this is a pretty easy one for me. Tyler Warren fell right to Sean Payton, which makes me kind of sick to my stomach, because I think that Sean Payton is going to love to see a guy like Tyler Warren fall right to him. So I'm going to make this easy. Tyler Warren.
I feel like the more comparable person compared to Dallas Clark would be Taysom Hill, Ricky.
Ooh, yeah, Taysom Hill. That's like my mortal enemy right there, man.
But I could picture him, Sean Payton, falling in love with him. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
This is going to be a fun one for me because the Steelers are considered the land of the disgruntled wide receivers, and so who knows what happens with George Pickens. They could use some help. They got Mike Williams. Maybe we could just look a little bit like who the wide receivers are out there.
Yep.
I like Matthew Golden, but I'm just going to bank on someone who has been highly productive for many years. It's a wide receiver factory. Let's go with Emeka Egbuka from the Ohio State University.
That's a good pick. I like that too. A consistent player, right? That can kind of, that like we talked about the complementary players, Emeka Egbuka, and then pairing him with a guy like George Pickens. The only thing that I would wonder about there is if Egbuka is the slot guy, what does that do with Calvin Austin Jr., right? Because they seem to like Calvin Austin a decent bit, but I think that Egbuka can play a little bit of that flanker role too. I don't think that he has to be purely slot. He's got good size. I think that his route running allows him to play each position, his alignment versatility. It's a big time thing for him. So I think that's a really nice pick. The Chargers. This is an interesting one, and I'm not really sure which way I lean here. If I had to say what the Chargers need, I think it's defensive help more so than the offense. But the offense, they don't have a premier wide receiver. Quentin Johnston. They do have Ladd McConkey though. And Ladd McConkey had a outstanding rookie year. Draft crush. That was your guy. That was who you liked. I don't get the feeling that they want to just give up on Quentin Johnston either, because he improved a lot throughout the season compared to where he was his rookie year. So I don't know that I can go with a wide receiver there. But what I could do is go back to old Michigan, where Harbaugh is very familiar, and he's probably very familiar with this guy right here, Colston Loveland. And I'm going to give them a pass-catching tight end that can help Justin Herbert out.
Oh, really? Someone from Michigan. Big surprise.
How about that? Yeah.
How about that?
Wears khakis, too.
The Green Bay Packers. Oh. I know. Wow. They've had... So needs are wide receiver, center, edge, and corner. I do know that... they do have an offensive-minded head coach. They made it to the playoffs and had a disappointing end. They can go in a lot of different directions. I think when we get to this point, Ricky, in the 20s, like this is one of your priorities, right? Like we could start filling best player available. We could start thinking about different things. Every team can really go in any direction, and no one be like, "Whoa, like that's crazy." Like they could really use making a strength to strength or filling a hole on either side of the ball. For me, Green Bay, I think. This person was out for the season. He was for some boards that were out there was a top 10 pick, and we also have an unsure a, a potential disgruntled cornerback in Jair
Mm-hmm.
Alexander, and
Yep.
so just to kind of add depth because I see him up there, and I know that he is actually really highly touted, but just happens to not have a full season this year. I'm going to go with the corner Benjamin Morrison out of Notre Dame.
Interesting. I like that. Good physical prospect too. Um, Minnesota Vikings. Minnesota Vikings.
Skull.
Man, they got the McCarthy JJ McCarthy Sam Darnold factor plays into that, and McCarthy's going to go. They've got Justin Jefferson. TJ Hawkinson came back. Uh, Christian Darrisaw, their left tackle, dealt with injury, so he was lost during the season, but that's a premier left tackle. The interior of that offensive line could probably use some help. But you know what? I think they got Jordan Addison, so like their pass catchers are pretty set there. They drafted Dallas Turner last year out of Alabama, a guy that I was very high on. I like him. I thought that he came on strong towards the latter part of the season as well with a little bit of development. So I'm going to look at a guy that could kind of do a little bit of versatile stuff for them. And I'm going to give them Jahdae Barron. They had, and this is a guy that I'm very high on as well. I think he could play corner. I think he could play nickel. I think he could play. He is a draft crush, I think, man. He could play corner, nickel, safety. I just think that he's a chess piece, and you give Brian Flores a guy like Jahdae Barron, who I also think can work on blitz packages. Some of those exotic looks that Brian likes to draw up. I really like that pick. I think that he can learn a little bit from Patrick Peterson as well. So give me Jahdae Barron there at pick 24.
Houston Texans at 25. I think people are aware that CJ Stroud needs offensive line help. I think they get it in free agency. They don't do it in the draft. I do know that they want wide receivers. Tank Dell, has the injury. I don't know how much he plays next year. Stephon Diggs, we don't know if he's coming back. They even took a flyer on our good buddy Deontay Johnson, so we know that they need a wide receiver. And this player, I think, has the potential. He might be better than Emeka Book. He could be. I think it was Daniel Jeremiah who said this guy could be wide receiver one in this class. But do not sleep on Matthew Golden, the wide receiver out of Texas. He's in Texas already. Make a strength of strength. They fired offensive coordinator in Bobby Slowick, and so I know they're not happy with their offense. But with the uncertainty at wide receiver, by them taking a lottery ticket on Deontay Johnson, I know it's in the back of their mind. It'd be nice to pair him with Nico Collins and keep CJ Stroud happy.
And he stays close to home too, from Texas to Houston. That's not too far of a trip for the rest of his fans. LA Rams. It's an interesting one too, man. I say that like every single draft pick. I'm like, well, that's an interesting one. It's because they're all interesting, man. Like I just don't really know,
That's what I'm saying. At this part of the draft, like you could really go any direct. All these playoff teams.
You can, man. Like really, you could just do just about anything with it. I'm gonna go with this guy right here, Wyatt Millum, out of West Virginia. This is a really good tackle. 6'6", 317. I think he's gonna come in with some pretty decent measurements. I think he could have a really nice week. I believe that he's at the Senior Bowl, if I remember correctly. I think that he can rise up draft boards. He's a technical guy. I think that he has a little bit of left and right versatility as well, which I think is important to the Rams because I think that they are still trying to figure out what they have there on that offensive line. But if you can protect Matt Stafford, I still think that Matt Stafford has the ability to lead your team to the postseason, as we saw, but further into the postseason. So give me the tackle out of West Virginia, Wyatt Millum.
Ooh.
And Kelvin Banks is having a slide here.
I know. And it's funny that you mentioned that because I don't know how big of a need it is, but for some reason the Baltimore Ravens always just get someone who slides and get someone who's like really, really good. And so let me pair Kelvin Banks to the Baltimore Ravens and to say like, oh, how did the Ravens do it again? And,
well, and that's smart because Ronnie Stanley, they don't know if he's gonna stay there, right? Like I believe that he's up for contract negotiation, so I think that's a pretty smart pick. And that brings us to the Detroit Lions at 28. They need edge help. They need a pass rusher. Can you imagine pairing Aiden Hutchinson, the Michigan edge, with Jack Sawyer, the Ohio State edge? Both of them are kind of madmen. Both of them can set the edge pretty well. And then both of them have a pretty nice arsenal at pass rush. We've obviously seen Aiden find success at the next level. I think that makes a whole ton of sense right there. And I think that Dan Campbell would absolutely love a guy like Jack Sawyer.
Mm. For the Washington Commanders, the newly eliminated Washington Commanders, I'm gonna pick up on what you dropped. A player that is, I think, will be rising. I think he has his fans. I think he can really help out an offensive line. He's really limited the amount of pressures. I think he'd be a. I think Jaden Daniels would be super happy with someone to help protect him. I'm gonna go with the person you mentioned earlier, Josh Connerly, the offensive lineman out of Oregon.
I think he's a really good offensive tackle. That's a really good pick. I think that's going to make Commanders fans and, like you said, Jaden Daniels very happy. The Buffalo Bills. Look, I think the Buffalo Bills are still a dynamic wide receiver playmaker away from being able to finally knock off the Kansas City Chiefs. But I think that they've also worked really hard to find another position to kind of like shore up, and they haven't been able to do so, and that's cornerback. I think that they need a corner. I think that they are going to have their choice here between some really good ones. I like Siobhan Revel out of ECU. He's coming off of the ACL, but this is a tall, rangy, good ball skills corner. But there's another guy that I'm going to go here off the beaten path that I think has a chance to really rise up after the Senior Bowl. That's Azariah Thomas out of Florida State. This guy is going to remind people of another Florida State guy that came out last year. Now his name is completely evading me. Why can I not think of his name?
Renardo Green.
Renardo Green. Yes, Nardo. Thank you. Azariah Thomas. That's who I'm going to take with pick 30. I think that's my surprise pick here for the first round.
For pick number obviously this can change because of the Super Bowl, but we got the Eagles. I know that they love drafting defensive interior in the first round. I know that they potentially could lose Milton Williams, Josh Sweat, so defensive interior edge defenders. But I feel like there's no easier person to replace a pass rushing rotational guy like a defensive pass rushing specialist on the interior like Milton Williams with a guy like TJ Sanders out of South Carolina.
Ooh, TJ Sanders. You saw I was sitting here circling around Walter Nolan. You went TJ
I like
Sanders.
Walter Nolan. I was thinking more of like the Milton Williams, but I know they have Jordan Davis. I know they have Jalen Carter. I didn't want to three gigantic hulking. So I went with I like Walter Nolan better, but I was thinking more about Eagle. What one of your philosophies, right, Ricky? Like fitting in the puzzle. I think TJ Sanders would fit that puzzle really well.
Makes sense. I think that Derek Harmon could be a dark horse there too, because Derek Harmon is a good pass rushing defensive interior player as well. So then we get to the Chiefs, man. And this is what the Chiefs are able to do. They can look at this and just say, what do we need? What can make us, even better than we are right now? I mean, what would you say their weaknesses are? I don't know that they necessarily have like a true weakness to that team.
Like he's a quarterback.
Yeah, quarterback maybe. Yeah, theirs is getting a little bit old, and you can tell is like declining, right?
He's only been to 5 Super Bowls in the 6 years.
Yeah, just not that impressive anymore. Chris Jones, we know, moves everywhere on that defensive front. I think that they could like a player that can kind of work in tandem with him. I think that Walter Nolan could be in play there. I think that Nick Scorton could make a lot of sense there. I'm high on Nick Scorton. I'm going to end up liking him more. Tyleek Williams is also another prospect. Now I'm just going to name off the ones that I really like that we didn't get to fit in anywhere here.
I know. Jahad Campbell.
Yeah, Jahad Campbell is like, that's probably my draft crush of the draft crushes right now. I am very high on Jahad Campbell.
Oh, okay.
But I'm going to go with Princely. Yuman Mielen. I'm not sure that I said that correctly. Out of Ole Miss, the edge rusher. This is a 6'4", 260-pound guy that has some serious get off, serious explosiveness and bend for a guy his size. And I think that having a guy that can wreak havoc with George Karlaftis, Chris Jones, and the rest of that Chiefs defense for Steve Spagnuolo, I think that he would love to have an edge that plays like that. So that does it for our initial full first round mock. Now look, can I download this thing so that we can? Okay, I've got it. So we'll put this out for our very first mock draft, and we'll keep this in our back pocket
Yep.
so that once we get to a point where we have to actually make one with a little bit more informed decisions, right? And the process kind of unfolds a little bit more. We'll look back to this, man, and we'll just see what was our thought process on some of these prospects and some of these teams. Where could they be looking? I'm pretty happy with the way that turned out, though. Edgar, what do you think? Was there anything that you regretted with that you wish that you had went a different way?
Not that I regretted. Well, first of all, because we made this mock draft, it's going to be 32 out of 32 correct when it
100%.
rolls around to April.
Yes.
Um, I do wonder where the quarterbacks, because that's always like a landmine, right? Like somebody will like a quarterback, they can't wait till
Yep.
the second round, and so
Yep.
could you see a Jalen Milrow? Could you see a Jackson Dart? Or could they fall, right? And so
Yep.
that's the only thing that, not that I regret, but like potentially could upset the order of things if a team falls in love with a quarterback.
And when we do the next ones where we have that more information and we have more of a feel for like the landscape of the draft, I
Mhm.
think that you might see a guy like even a Jackson Dart or a Jalen Milrow. I think you might see one of them creep into that first round.
Yeah.
But with this one being a little bit more of what you and I would do,
Yep.
like if we had to make a decision and we lean a little bit more on what we would do individually,
Mhm.
I just am not super in love with this quarterback class. So it's hard for me to look at those spots and say, yeah, this is where I would take a chance on Jackson Dart. I do like Jalen Milrow's skill set, but man, that
Mhm.
guy's got a lot of work to do when it comes to reading defenses and decision making. So I
Yep.
think that that's a spot where he's going to need to sit for a little bit. I will say, how much fun would it be if he ended up in a place like Baltimore, in the second round? Like just what
Yeah.
if he learned from Lamar Jackson? That's a waste of a pick in my mind, but it would be a whole lot of fun, man, for him to learn that from probably the best dual threat quarterback we've ever seen in Lamar
Uh,
Jackson.
Yeah, and there are teams that need to figure out what to do with the quarterback. So, like, what are the Pittsburgh Steelers going to do? What are the New York Jets going to
Right.
do? And so there's quite a few teams that, like, what are the Dolphins going to do? And so
Yep.
there's some real questions about what are some teams going to do with the quarterback position, and that again that particular position always changes everything because you could have a big board, which is great,
Yeah.
and then you have to, like, if you don't have quarterback, we know teams feel like they don't have a team until they have that quarterback position solidified.
I would have loved to put Jalen Milrow on the Steelers, but I mean, Mike Tomlin didn't even want to play Justin Fields over Russell Wilson. So I got just,
Mm.
it's tough for me, man. But hey, look, maybe we'll do a little bit more of those exercises on the next episode.
Yeah, yeah. Maybe we
All
should
right.
do a, like, off the beaten path mock draft.
Yeah, there you go. Just like I've never seen this player mocked here before. We are not allowed to mock that player to a team if
Hmm.
we've seen him on a mock draft before.
Oh, I
That's
like
kind
that.
of interesting. Okay. Well, hey, let's think about it. This has been a great first episode. I
Yeah,
think that we're going to leave it there for today. We'll get this put out and we'll get people's reactions. Tell us how much you dislike all of our picks. Tell us how we ruined your team with one simple draft pick. Edgar, thanks for doing this, man. And I look forward to the next episode.
yeah. And to be honest, like, again, like, comment, and subscribe. If you're commenting, like, and you say, like, "Hey, Ricky, Edgar, like, you messed up our team," give us ideas of who your fan bases really want, because
Please.
we want to take in all the information. So more of your teams than we do. We're looking at it from a big, uh, you know, 50,000 foot level
Yep.
view of these teams. So if you hate it, love it, leave a comment.
And hey, if you got a draft crush, leave it in the comment and tell us, and maybe we'll let you come on and explain to us why that's your draft crush. That could also be something.
Absolutely.
But any of the comments, the liking, the following, subscribing helps us in the algorithm as well. This is our initial debut with this show. So any support that you're willing to give, we would gladly appreciate. And until next time, good luck finding your draft crush.